Greetings everyone, I'm Brett Haskell. In this video, I'm going to share a little about my family's history on my father's side. I'll share my connection with the Puritans and the Pilgrims. I'll also share some connections with the Salem Witch Trials and even the American Revolution. So, speaking of the Mayflower, on September 16, 1620, 102 people boarded the Mayflower in Plymouth, England, and set sail for the New World. The voyage lasted 66 miserable days. The Pilgrims eventually landed on Cape Cod at what is now Provincetown, Massachusetts. While there, they realized they were nowhere near the intended destination in Virginia where they wanted to land. So in order to establish a legitimate colony, they drafted the Mayflower Compact. One of the 41 signers of the compact was a young man named George Soule. I'll get back to why he's important to my story shortly. Cape Cod was not a suitable settlement, as it lacked adequate soil and fresh water. The Mayflower and its passengers left Provincetown and headed west to what is now Plymouth in December of 1620. Many of the Pilgrims did not survive the first winter, but one who did was George Soule. George would later go on to wed Mary Bucket in 1627. They would go on to have 9 children, 5 sons and 4 daughters. One of their daughters, Patience Soule, married a Puritan settler named John Haskell. Now before John met Patience, he was living on the Bass River side of Salem, which is now modern-day Beverly. Now, here's where the Salem Witch Trial connection starts. Those who know the story, or have even seen Arthur Miller's play The Crucible, have heard the name John Proctor. He was one of the people accused of witchcraft and hanged. In 1665, Proctor sued John Haskell for breach of promise for not marrying Proctor's daughter Martha. Proctor would win the lawsuit, but John was not interested in marrying Martha, so he fled to what is now Middleborough, Massachusetts. George Soule died sometime between 1679 and 1680. He was buried in Miles Standish Burial Ground in Duxbury, Massachusetts. This is America's oldest maintained cemetery. John and Patience Haskell were also buried here, but their exact location is unknown as their headstones are missing. So now let's go back a little bit to explore the Haskell side and how John ended up meeting a pilgrim in New England. So the story starts in a little village in Somerset, England called Charlton Musgrove. A man named William Haskell, who was a church warden at the Church of St. Stephen's in Charlton Musgrove, he married a woman named Eleanor Fowle in 1611. They would go on to have 7 children together, including 3 sons named William, Mark, and Roger. William Haskell Sr. passed away in 1630 and was buried at the Church of St. Stephen's. Not long after, his sons William and Roger headed to the New World. Roger stayed in Salem while William went to live in Gloucester, Massachusetts. Roger would marry Elizabeth Hardy around 1639, and in that same year, they had their first child, John Haskell. Now we're back to where we started. John married Patience Soule, daughter of Pilgrim, George Soule. There's the connection. So now we're going to go off the tracks a little bit, and we're going to follow one of Roger's other sons, Mark Haskell. Mark was vehemently opposed to the Salem Witch Trials. But unfortunately, he was summoned to be a juror in the trials in 1692. So he decided to take off. Because he fled, that thinking at the time was not cooperating was seen as an admission of guilt. He was labeled Witchcraft Mark Haskell and had to leave behind his wife and 6 children in Salem. One of his children, though, Joseph Haskell, would go on to have a son named L. Nathan Haskell. L. Nathan would serve alongside General George Washington during the Revolutionary War. They fought in Valley Forge, the Battle of Brandywine Creek, and the surrender of British General John Burgoyne at Saratoga in 1777. That surrender was captured in the painting by John Trumbull, which can now be seen in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. Pretty cool. So now let's go take a look back at how we ended up, our family, the Haskells, from New England all the way to California. So let's return back to John and Patience Haskell. One of their sons, John Haskell Jr., who was born in 1670, would go on to wed Mary Squire in Middleborough, Massachusetts. They would move to Killingly, Connecticut, and would have 12 children together. Dang, that's a lot of kids. One of those children is William Haskell, who was born in August of 1722. William would go on to wed Hannah Butler in March of 1758. William and Hannah would move to Barnstable, Massachusetts, and have 4 children together. One of those children was William Haskell Jr., born in 1761. He would move from Barnstable to a small town up in Maine called China. Yes, the same spelling as the country in Asia. William Jr. would marry Hannah Bragg in 1785. Hannah unfortunately did not live long after they were married, and she passed in 1794. They had 4 children together, but William didn't wait too long to remarry, and would later go on to wed Rhoda Small in 1794. The same year Hannah passed, which is kind of crazy. Yikes. William and Rhoda would go on to have 10 children together. Some of them had some very interesting names that bore some striking resemblance to our founding fathers, including George Washington Haskell in 1803 and Benjamin Franklin Haskell in 1785. Benjamin Franklin Haskell would go on to marry Abigail Allen in April of 1821. They would have 9 children together. Benjamin Franklin Haskell passed away in June of 1872. One of his children, Albert Haskell, would marry Elizabeth Ann Lancaster in December of 1847. They went on to have 6 children together, including Frederick Wilmot Haskell, born in July of 1865. Frederick will be the last Haskell in my line born in Maine and New England for that matter. Frederick would go on to pack up and head out west, really west. Fred ended up in Tehama, California. There, he met a woman he would marry, Mattie Ella King. They got married in November of 1890 in Tehama. The two would have twin boys, Ralph and Ray Haskell. Ralph and Ray were born in March of 1895 in Red Bluff, California. Ralph would later go on to marry Lily Spears. They had 1 son together, Douglas Ralph Haskell, in 1926. Douglas is my grandfather. He would go on to marry my grandmother, Patricia Olson. They moved from San Jose to a small town in Marin County, California called Novato. They had 3 children together, including my father, Michael. Grandpa Doug passed away in 2006, and Grandma Pat passed away in 2021. So there you have it, my connection to so many of this country's biggest events, including the voyage of the Mayflower, the Salem Witch Trials, and the American Revolution. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.